Rotten poverty, my daughter-in-law hissed, her lips curling into a cruel smirk as she shoved the checkbook back across the table toward me. The sting of her words cut deeper than any slap could have. She didn't just mean it as an insult, she meant it as a sentence, a declaration that I, the woman who had fed her, sheltered her, and saved her marriage more times than she'd ever admit, was disposable. And I could see it in her eyes, the greedy motive shining like a flame. She wasn't after my love, my presence, or my guidance. No, she wanted control over my money, my house, and the last years of my life. But she didn't know me as well as she thought. She didn't know the quiet strength that had been simmering beneath my wrinkles and tired smile for decades. She thought I was weak, but in that moment, a shocking twist bloomed inside me. The very checkbook she mocked was about to end not just her insults, but her marriage. What she imagined was her triumph would become her downfall. Before I take you further into this story, let me say this. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you welcomed into your family, if you've ever felt the sting of being cast aside like a burden, stay with me until the end. What I uncovered, what I did, and how it all turned back on her will shock you, but it may also remind you of the strength you carry inside. Make sure you like this video, leave me a comment, and subscribe to this channel, because stories like mine deserve to be heard. It all began on a quiet Sunday morning. I was sitting at my oak kitchen table, the same table where my late husband and I had once shared coffee every morning for 40 years, when my daughter-in-law Jessica stormed in uninvited. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she planted herself across from me. "You're not giving us enough," she snapped, throwing my checkbook down as though it belonged to her. My son David trailed behind her, silent and guilty, his eyes fixed on the floor. Jessica was always dressed to perfection. That day, she wore a crisp cream blouse tucked into tailored black pants, her blonde hair sleekly pinned back. She looked like a woman stepping out of a magazine, but her polished exterior hid a venomous tongue. "Do you know how embarrassing it is," she said, "to live in that tiny house you call a gift? David and I deserve better. His friends all live in big houses, drive nice cars. And we're stuck in mediocrity because you refuse to help." I blinked at her, stunned at the audacity. The tiny house she referred to was a fully furnished two-bedroom I had bought for them as a wedding gift. The car she drove had been financed by me. The groceries in their fridge, the bills she never saw, all paid from the savings I'd built by working double shifts at the diner in my younger years. My arthritis throbbed at the memory of all the mornings I'd stood on my feet serving coffee and pie to strangers, just so my family could one day live comfortably. "You've had enough help," I said softly, my voice trembling not with weakness but with restrained fury. "You both have jobs. You need to stand on your own." Jessica's laugh was cruel, hollow. "Stand on our own? Why, when you're still here to pay? You're old, Margaret. What else do you need money for? A grave? You're wasting resources just sitting in this house." My son flinched but said nothing. That hurt me more than Jessica's words. David, my boy, the one I had raised alone after his father died, the one I had carried on my hip while working nights, couldn't even defend me. His silence screamed louder than her insults. I swallowed hard, gripping the table's edge as the world tilted. It was one thing for Jessica to be greedy, but for my own son to stand by and let her cut into me, it was betrayal in its purest form. Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice to a sharp whisper. "You'll sign over the big account to us, or we'll make sure you regret it. You think you can keep that money safe? One slip, Margaret. One slip, and you'll be alone, broke and unwanted." Her words clawed at me, but then something inside me shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was fire. She thought she had me cornered. She thought her threats would force me into submission. But little did she know, that checkbook she shoved back into my hands wasn't my weakness. It was my weapon. Because while Jessica had been scheming for wealth, I had been preparing quietly. I had seen her true colors long before this day. The whispered phone calls she thought I didn't hear, the strange bills with David's name missing, the smirks at family gatherings whenever I paid for dinner, I noticed it all. And that morning, as she spat her venom, I realized it was time to act. I pushed the checkbook slowly toward her, smiling faintly. "You'll get what you deserve," I said. Her eyes gleamed with triumph. She thought she had won. But that was only the beginning. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the silence of the house pressing heavy around me. I pulled out old folders from the drawer where I kept my most important papers. My husband's will. Our savings accounts. Property deeds. And there, tucked neatly between them, was the divorce attorney's card I had been holding on to, not for myself, but for my son. You see, I had learned something Jessica never suspected. She had been unfaithful to David. I had the proof tucked away in photographs and receipts from hotel stays under her name. She thought I was blind, but no, an old woman sees more than she lets on. The betrayal stung, yes. But it also gave me the upper hand. Jessica wanted my money. She wanted me erased. But soon, she would lose everything she thought she had secured, including the marriage she treated like a transaction. The next morning, when David came by alone, his face pale and worn, I decided it was time to reveal a piece of the truth. I slid an envelope across the kitchen table toward him. He hesitated, then opened it. His hands trembled as he pulled out the photographs. Jessica with another man. Jessica signing receipts. Jessica smiling in the arms of someone who wasn't him. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the images. "Mom, how long have you known?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Long enough," I said quietly. "Long enough to know she doesn't love you. Long enough to know she's been playing you for a fool while draining me dry." His eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there too, rage. "I thought I loved her," he whispered. "She thought she owned you," I corrected. David slammed the photos back into the envelope, his breathing ragged. "What do we do now?" I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "We don't let her win. Not with my money. Not with your future. And certainly not with your pride." The plan began to take root then, quiet but strong. Jessica thought she had broken me with her smirk and her cruel words, but she had only awakened something she wasn't ready for. Because while she schemed for riches, I had something she could never buy, truth. And the truth was about to destroy her. But the question that lingered in my chest that night as I lay awake was this: could I truly pull it off? Could I protect my son while teaching his wife the lesson she so richly deserved? The answer would come sooner than I expected, and in a way even I couldn't have predicted. Because by the end of that week, Jessica wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything. Jessica wasn't one to wait. The very next evening, she showed up again, but this time she didn't come empty-handed. She marched into my kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm and a gleam of triumph on her face, as if she'd already won some invisible battle. My son David followed behind her, shoulders slumped, eyes cast down, the same way a boy looks after he's been caught in a lie. Without so much as a hello, Jessica slapped the folder onto my kitchen table. "Sign this," she ordered. Her voice was cold, sharp, and rehearsed. She had practiced this moment in her head, savoring it, waiting for the chance to put me in my place. I raised my brows and looked at the folder. Legal papers. I didn't need to read every line to know what they were. Power of attorney. If I signed, Jessica and David would control everything: my accounts, my house, my savings, even my healthcare decisions. In one stroke of a pen, I would no longer own my life. "You think I'm stupid, don't you?" I said softly, keeping my voice calm even as my heart pounded like a drum. Jessica smiled, that same cruel little smirk she'd given me the day before. "I don't think you're stupid, Margaret. I think you're old. And old people make mistakes. You should just sign it and make everyone's lives easier." Her words sliced through me. She wasn't even pretending anymore. No sugarcoating, no fake kindness. Just open cruelty. David shifted uncomfortably, finally finding his voice. "Mom, it's not what it looks like. It's just so we can help manage things, in case." "In case what?" I snapped, turning to him with tears stinging my eyes. "In case I lose my mind? In case I stop knowing my own name? Is that what you think of me, David?" He faltered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Jessica cut in smoothly, her tone dripping with condescension. "It's for your protection. You don't want to make mistakes with money at your age. It happens all the time." I stared at her, and in that moment, I realized she wasn't just greedy. She was dangerous. This wasn't about a house or a checkbook anymore. This was about power. She wanted complete control, and she was willing to drag my son down into the mud to get it. "You'll have to forgive me," I said finally, pushing the folder back across the table. "I don't sign things I haven't read." Her smile faltered. "Read it then," she said, her tone more forceful now. "I'll have my lawyer read it," I replied. That got her. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she masked it with another smirk. "You don't need a lawyer. We're family." Family. The word sounded like poison coming out of her mouth. She gathered up the papers, snapping the folders shut with a sharp crack. "Fine. Don't sign it tonight. But this offer won't last forever." The threat lingered in the air even after she stormed out, dragging David behind her like a shadow. That night, I sat in my living room staring at the clock on the wall. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second was a reminder that Jessica wasn't going to stop. She would push harder, twist David tighter around her little finger, and eventually, she would try something worse than papers. I knew I had two choices: give in or fight back. And I had spent my whole life fighting. The next day, I made a call. Not to David, not to Jessica, but to someone who had been a quiet ally of mine for years. My neighbor, Helen. A retired secretary with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. She had seen Jessica's visits, heard the shouting through the thin walls, and more than once she had whispered to me, "Don't let her push you, Margaret." Helen came over with a notebook in hand. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did. Every cruel word, every demand for money, every whispered threat. She wrote it all down, her pen scratching across the paper with determined strokes. "Good," she said when I finished. "We'll keep records. You're not alone in this." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. But Jessica wasn't done. 3 days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer I had never heard of, representing David and Jessica. The letter claimed that I was exhibiting erratic financial behavior, and suggested that guardianship proceedings could be initiated if I didn't cooperate with their reasonable request for control of my assets. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter shaking in my hands, tears dripping onto the paper. My own son. My David. He had signed his name at the bottom of this letter, agreeing with Jessica that I was incompetent, that I couldn't be trusted with my own money. I don't think I've ever felt humiliation like that before. It wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. To have your own flesh and blood suggest you're incapable, it broke something inside me. But even as I cried, something else hardened within me. They thought they could use the law to corner me? Fine. I would use the law to destroy them. The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer, Mr. Collins, a man I had known since my husband passed. He listened quietly as I told him everything, his sharp eyes narrowing as I handed him the letter. "Margaret," he said finally, "this is serious. But it's also sloppy. If they push for guardianship, they'll have to prove you're incompetent. And I'll make sure that doesn't happen. In fact, I think we can do better than just defending you. We can expose them for what they really are." I leaned forward, my hands trembling. "How?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said he had fought bigger battles than this one. "We'll gather evidence. Everything you told me, every word she's ever said, every dollar you've ever given them, it will all come back on her. And if what you say about her affairs is true," he trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Jessica had played her hand too early. She thought she was cornering me. But she had no idea that I had already started setting the stage for her downfall. That night, as I sat at my desk writing down every detail of her cruelty, every transfer, every receipt, every insult, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. And yet, I knew I couldn't let myself get comfortable. Jessica was clever. She wouldn't just wait for the law to move. She would escalate. And when she did, I had to be ready. And she did escalate. The very next week, she came to dinner with David and sat across from me, smiling sweetly. But as soon as David stepped into the kitchen to fetch dessert, she leaned across the table, her eyes glinting like knives. "Tick-tock, Margaret," she whispered. "You think you've got time, but you don't. Either you sign, or I'll make sure the judge puts you away in some home where you'll rot until the end." She sat back, smiling as David returned with a tray of pie, her face the picture of innocence. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just about saving my money anymore. It was about saving myself. Because Jessica didn't just want my checkbook. She wanted me gone. And if I didn't move fast, she might just get her wish. I spent the night making lists. Pages and pages of names, dates, amounts, and little notes, each one a small light I could follow out of the dark they had thrown me into. I was 78 years old, but my hands still wrote with a steadiness that surprised me. Betrayal had a way of sharpening things inside you, where soft edges used to be, a blade formed. When I woke, the house smelled like coffee and old books. Helen was already there, sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, the lines of her face deepened by worry and determination. "We'll do this together," she said, sliding me a fresh notebook. Her voice had that no-nonsense tone that had helped run a church board for 30 years. I felt grateful for her steadiness. We were small people against a rich woman who thought she could buy her way through life, but we had one advantage: history. Jessica left traces. First, I called Arthur and Mr. Collins. Arthur was my husband's old partner. Collins was gentle and fierce in equal measure. They told me what I already suspected: Jessica was building a case. Guardianship could be fast if you made someone look unstable enough. It was a frightening thing to hear in plain legal terms. "They'll use your age and your decisions," Collins warned. "They'll try to show you as erratic. But they'll need evidence. Our job is to show them a better picture: medical exams, financial audits, testimonies. And then we hit back with proof they forged or manipulated documents." Hearing the legal steps laid out made the battle feel more like a map and less like a fog. I could make moves. I could set traps. We started with the obvious: money. Helen and I sat at my kitchen table and opened every account statement I could find. My savings, the small retirement pots Robert and I had tucked away, the account dedicated to David's college fund, stuff I'd watched and guarded for decades. I wrote down transfers, dates, and who the checks were made out to. More than once I found little withdrawals around the time of family events, groceries, a new dress. Small things that looked harmless, but when added up, they painted a picture of slow bleeding. Jessica had learned how to pull the drip feed. She had also learned something else: how to manipulate perception. There were voicemails where she spoke softly into David's phone, saying things like, "Mom seemed confused today." There were texts where she artfully suggested my decisions were unusual for someone your age. She wasn't crude about it. She built a narrative. And once that narrative started to take hold, it was easy to write a letter and have a lawyer back it. That was the scary part. Helen volunteered to call neighbors. She was a social butterfly who knew everyone's business, and people owed her a kindness now and then. I didn't enjoy the idea of gossiping my own life to other people, but this was not gossip. This was defense. Within a day, she came back with notes: a delivery man who'd seen Jessica collecting checks from my mailbox, a woman down the street who said Jessica had once said, "We'll be comfortable soon, thanks to Margaret," and an old friend who'd overheard her complaining about Mom taking too much when she thought no one listened. Those little things matter in court. They tip the scales. Next, Arthur and Collins advised I get a full medical checkup and cognitive assessment. It wasn't for them, not really. It was for me and for the record. I went to Dr. Patel, who had been my GP for years. He ran tests: memory, logic, the usual cognitive checks, and he watched me carefully. He asked questions about my daily routine, my medications, who I spoke to and how often. When he handed me the results a week later, he smiled kindly. "Margaret, you're sharper than many folks half your age," he said. I laughed then, a little too loud for the sterile office. "Take that to your lawyer," he added. With the medical proof in hand, the next task was financial forensics. Collins suggested an audit of recent transactions. He recommended a woman he trusted, a forensic accountant named Priya Ramos. Priya had that look lawyers love: quiet, meticulous, and not easily impressed. She came to my house with a laptop, a legal pad, and a seriousness that made me feel like I'd finally hired the cavalry. We spent a long day in my dining room going through every paper, every check, every receipt. Priya's eyes narrowed when she saw a pattern: small checks written out in my name but cashed at a liquor store where Jessica liked to shop with her friends, payments to a hotel chain with unclear room names, a deposit into an account that, when we traced it, led to a shell company connected to a business with the same initials as Jessica's maiden name. She hummed softly, the sound of someone finding the missing piece of a puzzle. "It's sloppy but effective," she said, scrolling through a spreadsheet. "You don't need perfection when you control the narrative. Small withdrawals, when repeated, go unnoticed. But put them together and it's theft." I felt a sick pride at that moment, like a general who'd finally seen the enemy's troop movement. We now had numbers and lines. We had the flow of the money. Priya exported everything into a file and printed copies. "We'll give these to Mr. Collins," she said. "And we'll get a subpoena if they stole." While the money was important, evidence of Jessica's infidelity was the blow she'd been waiting to land on David. We had those photographs, but photographs alone can be dismissed. Arthur suggested we go a step further, find witnesses, receipts, and timestamps that show her presence where she claimed she wasn't. Helen remembered a florist who had seen a woman leaving a hotel late one night with a man who was not David. Priya found a credit card receipt. It took time, calls, and a few awkward conversations where I had to ask strangers to look at their records for a woman named Jessica Whitman. Some doors closed, but one opened when a hotel manager agreed to check surveillance footage on the condition of a subpoena. Alongside the formal work, I started playing a quieter game at home. I began writing everything down again, the small humiliations, the words Jessica said that mattered. I printed voicemails and saved texts. I made copies of every time I'd helped them out and wrote the dates in my notebook. Memory is fallible in court, but paper is not. The list became my shield, a long line of facts that no clever smile could erase. David began to come around, slowly. I could see the confusion on his face when he read the emails Priya had printed. The first time he admitted he'd seen the hotel photos, he did it like a man pulling off a bandage. "I thought it was work. I thought it was nothing," he told me, eyes hollow. "She told me I was overreacting when I asked. She made me feel bad for even asking." "You were in love," I said, so softly it almost surprised me. "Love can blind you to things that are obvious to everyone else." He looked at me then, any stubbornness gone. "I don't know what to do." "Then do what's right," I answered. "Not what scares you. Not what's easy. Do what's honest." He nodded, and I saw a small shift. He began to ask questions, to dig into accounts, to apologize for spending money he thought was mine to give. It was slow, but it was real. Having him awake to the reality of the situation made the fight feel less lonely. One night, while going through a box of photographs, Helen found something unexpected, a stack of letters hidden behind a loose board in the attic. "Someone was hiding these," she whispered, her voice sharp with the thrill of discovery. The letters were from someone named M. A lover's initial. They were silly at first, loving, but then the dates lined up with nights when receipts had shown charges at hotels. They were small things, but when pieced together, they formed a story uncomfortably consistent with what we already suspected. We couldn't act on them without making sure they were admissible. Arthur advised caution. People can be messy, and messy can't always be used. But the letters were another thread in the tapestry we were weaving. As we built our case, Jessica's moves became bolder, almost frantic. She started to show up at my house unannounced, ringing the bell and calling me names through the door before storming off. Once, she left an envelope shoved under the mat. Inside was a handwritten note telling me to sign the power of attorney or suffer the consequences. Her messages escalated from condescension to threats. One afternoon, Helen called me in a panic. "They were at the bank, Margaret," she said between breaths. "They asked about you, about joint accounts." My heart hammered. The bank is where the battlefield becomes public. If they could influence a cashier or get a careless clerk to execute changes without proper oversight, the papers we had worked so hard to collect could be meaningless. I went to the bank the next morning, not as a frail older woman, but as someone with purpose. I spoke to the branch manager, handed over photocopies of my ID, my account numbers, and a written note stating I was the sole owner of certain accounts. I asked them to flag any activity that didn't match my usual patterns and to notify me directly if anyone requested changes. They obliged, and I felt a small relief. A line of defense. But the most important move was still to come. Arthur advised something daring, an early legal strike. "We don't have to wait for them to act," he said. "We can file first." We petitioned the court with the forensic evidence, the medical proof, and the witness statements. We ask for an injunction preventing them from making any financial changes until this is settled. He explained the risks. If we filed and the judge found we were overreaching, it could look like paranoia. But we were not paranoid. We had proof. I signed the paperwork with a tremor in my hand and a resolve in my heart. When the clerk stamped the document and told me the hearing would be set within days, I felt both fear and power, fear for what they might do in the time before the court, and power that we had made the first clear legal move. That night, as I sat with Helen and David around my kitchen table, I felt very old and very alive at the same time. We had done more than gather papers. We had forced the issue into daylight. No one can scheme forever in the dark when the law is knocking on the door. But just when I thought we had our footing, Priya called with a voice like ice. "They've moved," she said. "There's a wire transfer pending, large. And there's a document that's been notarized in your name, Margaret. It's been filed electronically. It has your signature." My breath caught. "What document?" "A transfer of property," she said. "A conveyance for the house. The real estate office shows it pending. And the signature, well, it looks like yours." I felt the room tilt. My first thought was that someone had forged my signature. My next thought was darker. Had I really signed something in a moment of confusion? My mind raced through images of the last week, Jessica's face, the nights of little manipulations, the way David had looked away. Had there been a moment my memory missed? Could I have been pressured into something? The possibility left a hole under my feet. "No," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to them or to myself. "No, I didn't sign. Not that." Priya's voice was steady. "We'll trace the filing time. We'll get a copy of the notarized document. We need to move fast." Arthur called immediately and told me to get to his office. There was no time to wait. He had a look on his face as he opened the file he'd pulled up online, a scanned deed, stamped and recorded, an electronic signature marked with the same cursive loop I had used for decades. My hands were ice. "They forged it." I croaked. "It looks like it," Arthur said. "But the county records show it was filed late last night. Someone notarized it at 10:45 p.m. "That's impossible," I said. "I was home. I was folding laundry." "That's what we'll argue," he said. "But if it's on record, they can claim ownership. We have to show the signature is forged and that the notarization is fraudulent, possibly provided by someone in their circle." My mind dug into memory, searching for anything that could explain the stamp: a courier who might have asked to look at papers in the mail, a notary who'd come by, a clerk who saw my signature. But nothing fit. We started to call the notary listed on the filing. The number didn't connect. Helen's hand found mine under the table. "You didn't sign it," she said. "You would have told me." "I would have," I answered. Arthur's face hardened, and he started making calls. "Get every surveillance camera in the area for last night," he instructed the clerk. "Get the notary's file. We need video, phone records, anyone who can place that notary at a desk, not at your house. And David, you need to think. Did Jessica come over last night after dinner? Were you in the house?" David's answer was shaky. "I was at a friend's. She said she'd take care of a few things. She said it would make everything easier." The room spun. She had been inside while I slept with the porch light on. She had been there while I folded laundry. She had moved in the dark I thought I had secured. Her reach was longer than I had realized. Arthur looked at me with something like fire. "This changes things. They aren't just trying to pressure you. They are actively stealing. We'll file an emergency injunction to freeze any transfers and prevent the clerk from recording the deed until we can present evidence of forgery." I nodded. My voice felt small, but it carried. "Do it." As Arthur spoke to a clerk to prepare the emergency filing, my phone buzzed. I saw Helen's name, then a message from an unknown number: "Get out tonight. They'll try to lock it. Go now." My heart thudded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Who was watching? Who had sent that text? I folded the phone into my palm and swallowed. The house suddenly felt too small. The night outside held new dangers. I had planned and fought, but I had not expected them to move like this. They had forged my signature and tried to steal my home in one night. We had to act. And we had to act now. But even as Arthur faxed papers and Collins prepared affidavits, a new question burned under my skin. Was the person who sent that warning helping me, or had they merely watched this long enough to know when to text? Either way, I was no longer willing to be passive. I had made my first legal strike. Now they had made theirs. The hearing could come at any time. The bank had been alerted. The deed was frozen, maybe. But the fight had reached a new level. They were no longer playing with bluff and whisper. They were trying to write me out of my own life in ink that could be recorded. I pressed my palms against the kitchen table, feeling the grain of the wood. It steadied me. I had built this life. Robert and I had built it together, brick by careful brick. They wanted to sweep it away. They wanted me to vanish. I thought of the pages I had filled that morning, the lists, the receipts, the notes. I thought of Priya's spreadsheet that traced the money in a neat, damning line. I thought of the hotel receipts, the letters in the attic, the neighbor's testimony. I felt the surge of all the small strengths I had called upon, stubbornness when I needed to be stubborn, kindness when I needed allies. They had made one move that might have been decisive. But it came at a cost. Their desperation left traces. Forgers leave fingerprints, or at least patterns. A late-night notarization leaves a trail. A transfer leaves a log. We would follow the trail. We would name every step. And when the judge asked who acted in bad faith, we would answer with proof. Arthur looked up from the phone, his brow furrowed. They've got a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning on their petition. They're calling for temporary guardianship. We need you to be there. Be ready. My breath hitched. Tomorrow. I looked at David. He looked at me. We had one night to prepare for a courtroom where the stakes were the roof over my head. They thought they had forced my hand. They had pushed too far. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling old and fierce at the same time. Outside, the night pressed against my windows. Inside, the papers rustled like leaves. Tomorrow would be a reckoning. But tonight, I would not be a victim. I would fight. And I would use every scrap of truth I had gathered to burn the lies they'd built. The phone buzzed again. Another message, from the same unknown number. Bring the folder. Bring proof. They'll try to lock it before sunrise. The courthouse smelled like old wood and polish, the kind of place where the air itself seemed heavy with secrets. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my heart drumming in my chest as the bailiff called the case. My hands trembled in my lap, but I refused to fold them together like a penitent. I wanted the world to see me steady, even if my knees felt weak. Beside me sat Mr. Collins, flipping through papers with the calm focus of a man who had lived his entire life in courtrooms. On my other side, Helen squeezed my wrist. Her eyes told me everything. You are not alone. Across from us sat Jessica. Her lips were painted red as a wound, her black dress sleek, her posture regal, as if she were attending a gala instead of a hearing about my life. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering with that sly smile that had always been a mask. My son David sat 2 rows behind her, torn in half by blood and loyalty. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. The judge, a tall man with gray hair and a voice that carried authority, cleared his throat. This is the matter of Whitman versus Margaret Hayes, concerning a petition for temporary guardianship and financial control. Counsel, proceed. Jessica's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client seeks this guardianship for one simple reason, to protect her mother-in-law from herself. Mrs. Hayes is 78 years old. She has demonstrated confusion with her finances, has made reckless decisions, and is vulnerable to exploitation. We submit into evidence a deed signed last night, transferring her home to my client for safekeeping. Clearly, Mrs. Hayes does not understand the weight of her actions. My throat closed. Safekeeping. They called it that. Collins leaned closer. Don't flinch. We'll bury that lie. Jessica's attorney went on, painting me as fragile, confused, lost in the world. Each word tightened a knot in my stomach. He mentioned erratic behavior, forgetfulness, even my choice to loan David money years ago as proof of poor judgment. Lies dressed up as concern. And Jessica sat there nodding, tilting her head like a saint. When it was our turn, Collins rose. His voice was calm, deliberate. Your Honor, this is not protection. This is predation. What my client has suffered is not confusion but calculated manipulation. He lifted the folder we'd prepared. We submit evidence of forged checks, unauthorized withdrawals, and a fraudulent deed filed under Mrs. Hayes' name last night. My client was at home. We will show proof she could not have signed these documents. The judge raised a brow. Do you have corroboration? Collins motioned to Priya, who stepped forward with a neat stack of papers. Yes, Your Honor. Forensic analysis shows the deed signature was traced from a document Mrs. Hayes signed 5 years ago. Furthermore, the notary listed cannot be reached, because she does not exist in the state database. This is a fabricated notarization. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Jessica's face cracked for the first time. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted. But Collins wasn't done. Additionally, we have financial records showing thousands of dollars siphoned into an account linked to Ms. Whitman's maiden name initials. We have receipts for hotel stays paid with Mrs. Hayes' checks. And we have statements from neighbors and service workers who overheard Ms. Whitman boasting that she would soon be wealthy thanks to her mother-in-law. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. This is serious. Collins pressed forward. It gets worse, Your Honor. We have letters, personal letters, hidden in the home, demonstrating Ms. Whitman's infidelity. Combined with photographs provided by a witness, it becomes clear this is not the portrait of a devoted daughter-in-law, but of a woman exploiting her husband's family for personal gain. The silence in the room was so sharp it rang in my ears. Jessica shot to her feet, her voice trembling with rage. This is lies. That old woman doesn't know what she's talking about. She's senile. She's been poisoning David against me from the beginning. Her mask was gone, fury spilling out like venom. Her lawyer tried to pull her down, but she shook him off. For the first time that morning, David looked at me. His eyes were wide, glassy with shame. And then he looked at Jessica, screaming in front of the judge, calling me names, accusing me of madness. I saw the moment it clicked inside him, that quiet shift when a man finally sees the truth he's been avoiding. His face crumpled. He buried it in his hands. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. Sit down, Ms. Whitman. Jessica's voice cracked. She's ruining everything. You don't understand. Without this, my family has nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. The words echoed like a confession. Every head in the gallery turned toward her, eyes narrowing, whispers starting. Collins seized the moment. There it is, Your Honor. Not concern for Mrs. Hayes. Not love for her husband. Not guardianship for her protection. But greed. Plain and simple. The judge's gaze cut into Jessica like steel. I will review the evidence. But based on what I've heard, I am issuing an immediate injunction. No property transfers, no financial withdrawals, no changes of guardianship. Mrs. Hayes retains full control until this case is resolved. Relief washed over me, but only for a breath. Because Jessica's eyes turned toward me then, sharp as blades, filled with a hatred I had never seen before. She mouthed the words across the courtroom, words only I could see, this isn't over. I sat frozen, the gavel's echo still hanging in the air. I had won today, yes. But her fury promised more to come. And I could feel it deep in my bones. Jessica wasn't going to retreat quietly. She would claw, scream, and scheme until the last scrap of power slipped through her hands. And I had to be ready. Because the real battle, the one that would break everything open, was just beginning. The morning light streamed through my kitchen window, soft and golden, yet I felt no warmth from it. My teacup sat untouched before me, steam curling into the air like smoke from an old fire that refused to die. The courtroom battle had ended, but Jessica's shadow lingered. Her threat, those silent words mouthed at me across the bench, echoed in my mind with every tick of the clock. This isn't over. I wasn't naive. I had lived nearly 8 decades, and if life had taught me anything, it was that people like Jessica didn't slink away when cornered. They fought back, nastier and wilder, because their greed couldn't accept defeat. She had already tried lies, fraud, manipulation. What came next could only be worse. 2 days later, I got my answer. A thick envelope appeared in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a lawsuit, drafted with venom. Jessica was suing me for emotional damages, undue harassment, and interference in her marriage. The pages stank of desperation, the kind of last-ditch weapon a drowning woman swings wildly, hoping to pull someone else under with her. I carried the papers to my kitchen table and laid them flat, my fingers brushing over the bold print. My chest tightened, but I did not panic. I had been humiliated, threatened, betrayed, but never broken. Not then, not now. Helen arrived an hour later, her face flushed from walking too fast. Margaret, you look like you've seen a ghost. I slid the papers toward her. She skimmed, her mouth pulling tight. She's grasping at straws. Collins will shred this to ribbons. I wanted to believe her, but doubt prickled my heart. Jessica wasn't after money this time. She was after blood. She wanted to ruin my name, stain my dignity so that even if I kept my house, I'd lose myself. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet, I opened Robert's old Bible. Between Psalms and Proverbs, tucked inside the pages, was a yellowed photo of the two of us from our younger days. His smile steadied me. "You don't stop fighting, Maggie. Not until the last stone is laid." His voice seemed to whisper through the silence, urging me forward. Collins prepared our counterstrike. He gathered witness statements, forensic signatures, financial trails. Priya dug deeper, uncovering not only Jessica's fraudulent deeds but also evidence of debts tied to loan sharks and her family's crumbling investments. Every scrap painted the picture of a woman desperate to climb out of ruin on the back of my sacrifices. The final hearing came on a rainy afternoon. The courthouse was packed this time, curious eyes eager for a spectacle. Jessica strutted in, her black suit sharp as a knife, but her eyes restless. Her confidence was a costume, and I could see the frayed threads unraveling beneath it. The judge took his seat. "We will hear closing arguments." Jessica's lawyer sputtered through rehearsed lines about a poor young woman wronged by her cruel mother-in-law. His words rang hollow. Even David, seated behind them, looked unconvinced, his head bowed low. Then Collins stood. His voice was quiet but strong. "Your Honor, what sits before you today is not a case of harassment. It is a case of survival. Mrs. Hayes is 78 years old, and yet she has had to defend herself against forged documents, fraudulent withdrawals, and a smear campaign designed to strip her of her dignity. This lawsuit is not justice, it is revenge. And we can prove it." He handed the judge a folder. Inside was everything: the traced signatures, the non-existent notary, the bank account under Jessica's maiden initials, the receipts from her secret hotel stays. And then came the final piece, the witness testimony from one of Jessica's own friends, a woman who had grown tired of her arrogance and came forward. In a sworn statement, she admitted Jessica had bragged, "Once Margaret's house is mine, I'll finally be free of this miserable marriage. David will be broke, but I'll have everything." The courtroom gasped. Jessica's mask shattered. She shot up, her voice shrill. "Lies. She's jealous of me. They all are. You don't understand, I deserve this. After everything I've put up with, I deserve." The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down." His voice thundered. Silence swept the room. He scanned the evidence one last time, then looked directly at Jessica. "This case is dismissed. Furthermore, I am recommending the district attorney investigate potential fraud and perjury." Jessica froze, her face white as marble. The room murmured around her, whispers sharp as daggers. David stood slowly, his face pale, his voice hollow. You used me. You used my mother." All of this, his words broke, but his silence after said more than any outburst could. Jessica gathered her purse with shaking hands, her once smooth stride collapsing into a stagger. She pushed through the gallery, people parting like water, whispers following her like smoke. For the first time, she wasn't in control. She was nothing more than a desperate woman exposed. When the gavel fell for the last time, I closed my eyes. Relief didn't come as fireworks, it came as a slow exhale, as if a boulder had been lifted from my chest after years of crushing weight. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like the world had been washed of her poison. David approached me then, his eyes red. He tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "Not now," I said softly. "I need time." He nodded, tears streaking his face. And for once, I didn't feel bitterness. Just grief for the son I loved and the years we'd lost to his blindness. That night, in my kitchen, I poured tea into my favorite cup. Helen sat across from me, smiling through her own tears. "You did it, Margaret. You took her down." I stared at the steam curling upward. I didn't just take her down. I protected what was mine. And I learned, my voice trembled but steadied. Even when the ones you love betray you, you can still rise. Dignity is the one inheritance no one can steal. I looked straight into the quiet, as though speaking to everyone who had ever been broken by betrayal. If someone ever tells you that you're too old, too weak, or too alone to fight back, don't you dare believe them. You fight. You stand. Because love and truth are stronger than greed. The kettle clicked off behind me, the house filled with calm. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe in my own skin. Jessica was gone, exposed to the world. And I was still here, standing. But I couldn't help the final thought that lingered as I sipped my tea: what about the next battle? Would my son ever come home to me, or was he lost forever? That question, unanswered, was the only shadow left in my house of light.